Welcome to the Southern Voice Rock Show. Here's your host, Jim Harris.
We have a very special episode for you today. We're honored to have as our only guest the legendary Rodney Mills. Rodney has over 50 gold and platinum records to his credit for mastering, producing, and engineering. He's been a part of some of the greatest Southern rock ever recorded by Lynyrd Skynyrd, the Atlanta Rhythm Section, 38 Special, Gregg Allman, plus other classic rock bands like the Doobie Brothers and Journey. Hey, Rodney, welcome.
Hey, Jim. So glad to be here. Thank you so much.
We'll start out with a statistic that's going to shock a lot of people, and probably not shock a lot of people, but put in perspective the absolute importance of the things that you've done. By my count and what I'm able to come up with, you have had a part in over 50 gold and platinum records.
Yeah, several of them been through the recording part of it. Actually, quite a few of them been through mastering, which in my latter part of my life has become a kind of a full-time profession and something I've kind of participated in every day. So I've had pretty good luck in all endeavors in the music business. It's been quite varied over the years, and I still feel pretty fortunate to be where I am.
Well, for those that are just meeting you for the first time, I'd like to let them know that you were the man at the controls when Lynyrd Skynyrd recorded Freebird, Sweet Home Alabama, Simple Man, actually 4 of their early albums, what most would say are their best albums. Also, at Studio One alone, maybe 7 38 Special albums and close to a dozen Atlanta Rhythm Section, the Outlaws and Journey. So I want to throw that in there early on just to kind of put in perspective exactly the imprint that you've had.
When you're doing those things or asked to participate in them, you're not thinking anything beyond just the basic thing that you're being asked to do. Never looked at any of that like it was going to live forever. And fortunately, some of it has endured over time. And, going back to the Atlanta Rhythm Section, the origins of the Atlanta Rhythm Section in 1970, building Studio One, Skynyrd coming in for their first album with Al Cooper and participating in that, not majorly involved in their first album, but after the first album was recorded, they wrote Sweet Home Alabama. They wound up booking the studio and came in and recorded just Sweet Home Alabama and held it off the first record until the second album came out. And they already had it in the can.
I want to come back to all the Lynyrd Skynyrd stories because I know there are a lot of them. But I want to rewind a little bit to even the days before you were sitting at the control panel and you were playing bass in a band called the Bushmen. And I've heard from a lot of guys in Southern rock that when they were maybe underage, somehow they managed to miraculously sneak into bars to see you play.
Well, I didn't had no recognition of that until actually some of the guys at Skynyrd kind of said, we used to come see you guys, and it's kind of like I don't think they even realized that I played in the Bushmen, and we were kind of down in the Jacksonville area. We were known as the Bushmen and the Revelons, and so we were kind of there and played all the time, and never knew who really came to see us. We played with a lot of bands and got to know a lot of musicians and everything, and to realize that later on those musicians became a band and played in a major force in the music of Jacksonville. It was kind of a eye-opening revelation to understand that the Bushmen we were making a mark without really thinking we were making a mark, if you know what I mean. We just played and had a good time.
It's amazing that after all these years, these guys recall those experiences so clearly.
Yeah, it is.
Then you moved to let's call it the other side of the glass, the control room. And one of your first efforts was a recording called Color Him Father by the Winstons, and I believe that was one of your first ones, and that one went gold. And part of the drum recording is the most, according to Google, sampled drum recording in the world.
Yeah, I didn't have complete knowledge of that until maybe 3 years ago, maybe even 4 years ago, that it was such a big deal. It was not Color Him Father, it was the B-side of the single, where Color Him Father was a huge hit and everything. And they didn't have another original song. So somebody said, well, y'all play this instrumental every night when y'all play live. And it's a song called Amen Brother. And in that song, in the part of the arrangement they already had worked up, they gave the drummer a break of like 8 measures, maybe 16 at the most. I didn't realize that it had become such a hugely sampled piece of drum solo.
You mentioned Studio One, of course, widely known that you had a huge hand in the design, and that was where a lot of your masterpieces were created. But that also had a long association with the band, the Atlanta Rhythm Section. Tell us about your experience with ARS, from a studio band to becoming a headliner, and how did that all happen?
Well, that goes back to when we were pretty much recording everything, and I worked for a guy named Maurice Lefebvre at Lefebvre Sound, another studio in Atlanta. And pretty much all the guys in the Atlanta Rhythm Section were the studio musicians that Eddie Bowie used whenever he was recording an artist, whether it be the Classics 4, Billy Joe Royal, B.J. Thomas, and just tons of people in Atlanta. Of course, as time went on and all those guys kind of were in the studio and everything, we got to recording to some of their musical ideas separate from the recording sessions with the artists that we were doing. And it became pretty good sounding stuff, but Betty said he's going to try to shop it and get him a record deal, and he did. So they got a deal with Polydor Records. And so the guys in the Atlanta Room Section were primarily guys from a group called the Candymen, who were a backup group for Roy Orbison back in the 60s. And so they were just guys I knew from back in those days when they were the Candymen. So when Betty organized it to be a formal group and included J.R. Cobb in the group, Rodney Justo was the singer for the Atlanta Rhythm Section. He was also the lead singer for the Candymen. Robert Nix was the drummer for the Candymen. Dean Daughtry was the keyboard player for the Candymen. So we had a kind of a built-in group that was used to playing with each other in the studio and out performing. And so it seemed like a natural thing for them to be grouped together and to become a group and get a record deal, which they did. And I kind of recorded everything from the very beginning, before there was even really a concept. So that transitioned over. Their first album, we started at Lefebvre Sound, and we got Studio One built. And we moved over to Studio One and finished ARS's first album there, and pretty much all their albums after that at Studio One.
By the way, we had Rodney Justo as a guest a couple of episodes back, and he's just the nicest guy.
He's the best. He's the best. And it's kind of like, I never forget to tell him, I said, Rodney, the Bushmen, we thought you guys were absolutely the best group we had ever seen, including all the superstars, everybody. I said, the Candymen were at the top of our charts, so to speak, as far as being absolutely the best. And we totally enjoyed seeing the Candymen perform. They did such a great variety of songs and arrangements and everything. And Rodney Justo was a driving force in that, and as well as the other guys in the Candymen.
Was there ever a time With the Atlanta rhythm section, did you see the potential early on and just knew that it was a matter of waiting till they got the right material put together? Or did you just sort of patiently wait and all of a sudden there was a track or a couple of tracks or whatever where the kind of the light bulb went off and you said, man, these guys are going to make it?
The strange thing about getting involved in a recording and everything that I always kind of put my heart and soul in everything we recorded. So every album the Atlanta Road section recorded, somewhere during that process, you just kind of fell in love with the songs, and you just knew there was going to be one of those songs out of that album that was going to make it, and everything was going to break wide open. And they would release an album, they'd go out and do several dates. If it didn't work out and the single wasn't really happening, we'd wind up back in Atlanta and go to work back in Studio One, playing on other people's recordings. So that kind of lasted until the next album, and then the whole process kind of started over again. When we finally got to Rock and Roll Alternative album, I think it was, and So Into You was one of the songs on that. It was not from the very beginning when we first recorded So Into You, but as the song developed and everything, we realized this song has really got the potential to be a great single. And it was, and it did become a great single. And that was kind of the impetus for their career, as far as taking off and being able to headline as well as to be a support band for some of the top acts in the world.
Looking back, it's hard to imagine that some of their songs like Dog Days and Back Against the Wall, that those songs never really caught on as they seem like they should have. I mean, these guys put out a lot of great material before they started seeing any commercial success.
Yes, but he's a great songwriter. He had a repertoire of hit songs that was just kind of like unsurpassed there in Atlanta and that whole area. It wasn't that Buddy didn't write good songs. It was just kind of like finding that niche where the Atlanta Road section fit. They had the right vehicle to travel on. And it wasn't until So Into You that really kind of like everything just kind of came together. And it's kind of like it was a combination of the people in the group being involved in the writing of the song, Buddy writing the lyrics, and the whole thing coming off. I remember when we kind of got everything overdubbed on the thing and started mixing the thing is when everybody's enthusiasm for So Into You came alive. Now, I agree with you. There were a ton of earlier songs that were really good. It was always a mystery to me why none of those became huge hit songs, but they didn't. It's hard to say what was the reason for that and everything. I just think that a lot of people get the opportunity and a lot of people don't. And the fact is the record company hung in there with the Atlanta Rhythm section until we finally recorded an album and a song that became what it became to be as successful as it was.
Well, there had to be a lot of satisfaction on your part when you saw these guys starting to kind of get what they deserved and getting the attention that they had earned.
It was really a big deal for me because I not only did all the recording in the studio, I road managed the band and mixed all their live sound. And so I was very involved in the sound of the band. Because I was intimate with all the recording and everything, it was like when they played live, I knew every note they were going to play. And what songs that they kind of jammed on, parts that played on the records and everything, when to bring up this, that. So all that contributed to me getting instant feedback as well as long-term that these guys were doing really something special, whether it be them playing a set of the songs and at the end of the night, that one song, Paul Goddard, the bass player, takes a solo in it and just completely floors the audience.
There were not a lot of bass solos ever that equaled that, I would think.
No. And Paul and I both realized, because we did several recordings of the song that he became famous for playing bass solos on it. We kind of refined the sound and enhanced this and that as time went on and everything. So the recordings of a couple of those songs went over a period of 10, 15 years. It took a while to develop them. And the fact is, that Paul was such a good musician. He could pull this off every night they played. And just to me, to be out there mixing sound, and Paul took that solo, the whole crowd just came alive. So it facilitated our room session getting a lot of encores.
I bet. One of the things that guys in the business, the musicians and the other folks that were there in the golden era, always say is that you were able to capture a band's live essence very, very well. And you didn't have, that I know of, any band that came out on stage and didn't hold up to what they did in the studio.
No. I came from a background of live performance, playing in the Bushman. It was all about how well we did live. And the fact is that we, as a small, when I say a small band, we never achieved any kind of stature, really, to be recognized that we did actually really good in a few markets. And we played all the time. We only played for kids. We didn't play for nightclubs. And so it was kind of like I came from a background of live music and what we were able to do live and everything. So I approached everybody I worked with like, this is really important, how well this comes off. Skynyrd was the first band that's, wow, this is beyond trying to capture what they did in the studio. This is trying to capture in the studio what they do live.
Alan Walden has some interesting things to share about Skynyrd, about kind of the attitude that they took when they went on stage. They were, in their early days, it was like it was a prize fight of them versus the headliner, and they were out to win no matter what.
Exactly. That transition over to my involvement with 38 Special had that same kind of mindset. I remember going and seeing 38 play it several times, and there was always this little period of several minutes where they all got together. 38 did. They had a meeting that was totally private to themselves before they ever went out on stage, that they were there to kick butt.
I've witnessed that happen. That leads me into my next segment, which is about the time that ARS was starting to hit it big. You had another band you were working with, 38 Special, that was starting to make some noise about the same time. They had a couple of good albums they had put together. They were on some tours with some big headliners, and they were starting to make some noise.
Yes. And for the third album that they did, I was fortunate enough that Jeff Carlisi, who played in the band, 38 Special, he had come out to Studio One because he was in Atlanta from Jacksonville going to school at Georgia Tech. And actually, Jeff graduated from Tech with a degree in architecture, which fortunately he never had to use. And Jeff would come out of Studio One and saw how we recorded with the Atlanta room section. Especially, I think my work with Barry Bailey, which Jeff was able to sit in on. And Jeff just said to himself, he said, I had an epiphany over in the corner. He said, I'm sitting there and says, that's the way I want to record. And so Jeff called me to get involved in their next project as an engineer. And I had the fortitude to kind of step to the plate and say, Jeff, I'd love to engineer, but I also like to be considered to produce y'all's next record. And Jeff bought into that idea. And so it was through that idea and everything, I was able to get a production deal. My first production deal was with 38 Special.
We had Jim Peterick on a couple of episodes ago, and of course he had a hand in, if you will, launching 38 Special. Not that they would not have gotten there anyway, but it was one of his songs that really sort of broke them through to some high visibility, Rocking Into the Night.
Yes. It was kind of like after I did the first album, '38, I took the finished product to A&M Records in New York City, and their manager was working at A&M Records at that time. So I played him the album, and he said, "Rodney, that's by far the best stuff they've ever recorded. Do you think we got a hit single?" I said, "Oh, I think we got a pretty good single. I don't know whether it's a hit or not." So he played me "Rocking into the Night." And it's kind of, he said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, that's completely different than anything we've recorded." And I don't know whether that sounds like Donnie or not, but I gave permission to send it down to the band, and they listened to it, and kind of the consensus was that everybody liked the song. And it was Don Barnes who said, "I think I could sing that song." Don had sang a couple of 3 songs on the album. He was kind of getting used to the fact he could be a lead singer also. Thank goodness Don stepped up to the plate, because that gave us the platform for the second album I did with the band, which the main song was co-written with Jim Petery.
He told the story about how after Rocking Into the Night made its way onto the album and on the charts, that Jeff Carlisi and Don Barnes flew up to Chicago, and they sat at basically his kitchen table and wrote "Hold On Loosely" the first night they'd ever met.
Yes.
That's 2 pretty iconic pieces of music there.
Yes. The fact that Jeff and Don participated in the writing of most all the singles after that. And Peter was a big part of that and everything. And wow, it's kind of like, I remember "Hold On Loosely." I heard the song before we went down to do pre-production and everything. Mark Spector, who was the guy that worked at A&M Records and became the manager of the 38th Special, he called me up. He said, "Rodney, we got a hit song in Hold On Loosely. Try not to screw it up." Thanks, Mark. It was a blessing to have that song come along and everything. And it was a collaboration between all those people. It was a winning collaboration that kind of stayed together for a good part of 38's career.
Not long after that, you were also involved in part of the work on a Journey album, I think their live album, but also a couple of albums by the Outlaws.
The Outlaws had a brand new producer at that time, guy nobody had ever heard of. His name was Mutt Lange.
Yeah, he kind of became a big deal after that, didn't he?
Oh, gosh, it's unreal. When he took off and everything and did that Back in Black especially, I had gone up to mastering in New York City with Bob Ludwig. And Bob Ludwig said, "Rodney, I want to play you something." And he took me back to his mastering room, and he put on the vinyl of Back in Black, and it's kind of like, so I'm sitting there, and sonically, it's kind of like, wow, this is something different. And it's kind of like Mutt Lange, of course, went on to produce some of the biggest albums there's been in rock and pop.
A couple of Def Leppard albums that went, I don't even know how many times, platinum.
The deal about that is, I always look at that, and it's like Mutt Lange did Def Leppard's biggest album, and then the next album they didn't use Mutt Lange, and it did not do near as well. And then they called him up and got him back, and then that album after that was huge again. So he did that with a couple bands. Wasn't just AC/DC, was kind of like the same story. Mutt was kind of a autonomous person in the studio. He wanted to do things his way, and it just so happened his way was a really good way.
It worked out.
Even with the Outlaws, to start with, we took the weekend off right after we got started in the studio, and then come Monday morning, Mutt comes to the studio and he's rewritten all the lyrics to their songs.
Wow.
They didn't know he was going to do that.
Typically, what is the difference in an engineer and a producer, and do those lines often get blurred?
They can get blurred. With me, it was kind of easy to separate it, because I think it was kind of like knowing when to keep your mouth closed and knowing when to give your opinion about something. as an engineer, you're responsible for all the sounds that go on a recording. I took that very seriously on every song I recorded. Is the guitar sound right? Is the bass sound right? Does the drum sound okay? You're just constantly working, trying to get everything that goes on a recording as good as it can be. So that's your responsibility. Making the decisions as far as everything goes is the producer's responsibility. And it's also includes the overall sound of the record. As a producer, you're responsible for that. So you pick the engineer, you pick the studio, you basically pick the song, the performances, the sounds, the tones, the textures, everything that goes into a recording is the producer's responsibility.
I just want to share with you that I cannot tell you how many artists that I have interviewed that, without me bringing it up, talk about the uniqueness of the sound that you were able to create at Studio One, and especially as it pertains to guitar parts.
You know, I was lucky enough to come up in a time where guitar sounds and how much they could contribute to a recording was just so important. And the musicians, their tones that they wanted to get in the studio were so important. They played really well. Part of the process was already there. They got great tones on their instruments to start with. It was my kind of responsibility to make sure we achieve that in the studio and enhance that in the studio if possible. Working with people like J.R. Cobb, Barry Bailey especially, because most of the stuff that Barry Bailey did that's significant on all those Atlanta Rhythm Section albums was him and me together in the control room at Studio One. And Barry sitting right next to me, and we have not a concrete idea of what he was going to play on each one of those songs, but we would just start, and Barry would just start jamming. Some parts he knew he was going to do. We paid attention to those, tried to think of all the other places he could add guitar parts and everything. And coming up, it wasn't just coming up with guitar parts, it was coming up with a sound that married with a song. And Barry was especially gifted with that. Stuck with me over the years. I think that's one of the things that impressed Jeff Carlisi with 38 Special, too.
I would think that Barry was one of the great underrated guitar players of all time.
Here's the thing. As much stuff as Barry did on all the Atlanta Rhythm Section recordings and everything, he was much more capable of going beyond what we ever recorded. Barry was never pushed to the point that here is a guy that's really exceptionally talented. We need to push the format to accommodate Barry. Barry always found a way to meld in and within that framework of the Atlanta Rhythm Section and still be recognized to a certain extent by people that knew what he was doing. But yes, I think he was underrated. There was a lot of really famous musicians that knew Barry Bailey and knew him very well. I even remember doing a gig with ZZ Top, and Billy Gibbons came on stage to do their sound check right after ARS had done theirs. And Billy Gibbons picked up his guitar and started playing So Into You. Wow, that was quite a tribute right there, because he recognized the song that ARS had done and everything, and somebody of his stature and everything to recognize that was pretty cool.
The tributes that poured out when Barry passed away, I remember especially one from Damon Johnson, who talked about how he would never forget the one time that he got to go visit in person with Barry Bailey, and he considered him an idol, and he got to actually play Barry's Les Paul. The clarity that he recalled every detail of that incident let you know exactly what an impact Barry Bailey had made on him and how much of a hero he considered him. Rodney, I had one question I really wanted to ask you, and that was, of all the acts that you've worked with over your incredible career, is there ever one that when you look back you say, this is an artist or these are some guys that should have made it big and for whatever reason didn't?
Couple. A group I can think of, and one solo artist. Solo artist was a kid out of Florida named Winston Slade. I produced an album on him, and it just kind of got lost in the politics of Nashville country music. And really talented kid and everything. He was only about 18 or 19 years old when we recorded that. I always thought that he had the potential to be a huge star. There's also the band from Warner Robins, Macon, called Stillwater. I thought that had a chance of becoming a big group. And they had a pretty big hit record with a song called Mindbender. And I did not record that song, but I recorded several things after that. And they really impressed me as being a super talented group.
Toward that same angle of question, has there ever been anyone that you really wish you had had a chance to work with, but it just didn't happen?
There's lots of people I wish I had had a chance. I never looked at it like there was a chance there and I did not take advantage of it or was not able to participate. It was more like, I was a fan of theirs. It's like even the Doobie Brothers. When I got a chance to work with the Doobie Brothers, I got involved in that, and I was a huge fan of theirs. I was with them from their very first album, and actually to be able to work with those guys in a recording studio and everything, that was kind of like a dream come true.
They're out on tour again this year, I just saw.
And I think Tommy Johnston's having some problems and everything, but I think Michael McDonald may be back with them. But I did 2 albums with them, and Michael McDonald was not in the band, but Tommy Johnston, who sang all the original hits, Black Water, which Pat Simmons sang. So he was back in the band and did a really good job. It was great to work with those guys. I told them the way I would approach their recordings, and I went over songs with them in a hotel room out in San Francisco, and I got hired.
And I'm excited to let everyone know that you'll be back on next week's episode with stories about your time with Lynyrd Skynyrd.
Thank you, Jim. All right. Take care now. Bye-bye.
In this week's Liner Notes, we want to talk about the 1971 Badfinger album, Straight Up. It produced 2 hit singles, Day After Day and Baby Blue, and had 3 different producers. Jeff Emmerich started, but Apple Records didn't like his tapes, so replaced him with former Beatle George Harrison. George completed 4 songs, then left for his concert for Bangladesh, and the work on the album was completed by Todd Rundgren. The song Baby Blue was played in the final scene of the classic television show Breaking Bad. In this week's covers, we want to recommend a remake of a Deep Purple classic. In 2009, the band Buck Cherry included their version of Highway Star on their album Black Butterfly. It's a rocker and worth a listen. Earlier you heard us talking about some of the Atlanta Rhythm Section albums from the time before they made it big and the great songs on those albums. In honor of that, this week's Hidden Gem is the 1975 Atlanta Rhythm Section album Dog Days. The title track is a great rocker. There's also a great song Crazy and a wonderful ballad, All Night Rain. Any Southern rock fan will want to check this one out. I want to again thank our incredible guest, Rodney Mills, and we'll see you next week on the Southern Voice Rock Show.
Thanks for listening.